The rhythmic drumming of rain against the cedar-shingled roof was the only sound interrupting the carefully orchestrated silence in the main room of the cabin. Michael Brown, 37 years old, a man whose life was defined by saving others, lay stiffly on his king-sized bed, his eyes narrowed to slits behind the heavy, antique oak door that was deliberately ajar. He was a rich mountain firefighter, a captain whose family had owned a massive stretch of protected woodland outside Aspen, Colorado for 3 generations, a fact that had unfortunately attracted the worst kind of attention in the past. Tonight, with a severe flash flood warning echoing from his satellite radio, Michael was conducting a personal and deeply unfair experiment on the one person who depended on him, his new housekeeper, Sarah Thompson. Sarah, 28, was in the kitchen, her silhouette cast long and heavy by the single kerosene lamp she kept lit to conserve electricity. She moved with a ponderous, careful grace, her 8th month of pregnancy a visible weight under the simple, oversized sweatshirt she wore. Sarah had arrived just over 4 months ago, found through a discreet agency specializing in remote placements, with no references and a heartbreakingly honest confession of utter destitution. She had nothing but a worn canvas duffel bag and a desperate plea for work, needing only shelter and a minimal wage to last until the baby came. Michael, a man hardened by years of responding to emergencies and, more recently, betrayed by his fiancée, who had vanished after he'd signed over a significant trust fund to her, felt a cold, calculated distrust settle over him like a shroud. He'd learned that desperation, like fire, consumed everything in its path, including integrity. The air smelled of damp wood, pine needles, and the residual warmth of the fireplace. Michael's gaze was fixed on the knotty pine table where he had strategically placed a substantial item before feigning sleep an hour ago. It was a metal lockbox, about the size of a small brick, usually secured in his fireproof safe. Inside were $6,000 in cash, 2 weeks' payroll for the seasonal logging crew he managed on the side. He hadn't bothered to lock the box. The small brass clasp was simple to flick open. It sat there gleaming faintly under the weak light, a silent, powerful temptation. To Sarah, who he knew was saving every last dime to secure a single-room rental in town before winter set in, it represented a monumental, life-changing fortune. He had built this life of isolation following the public humiliation of his last relationship. His fiancée, a woman he had trusted implicitly, had orchestrated a complex scheme to access his assets, seeing him not as a partner, but as a resource. The resulting cynicism was a protective layer, thicker than any fire-resistant gear he wore on the mountain. He saw potential exploiters everywhere, and while Sarah was quiet, hard-working, and almost aggressively humble, Michael couldn't shake the suspicion that her quietness was a mask. He needed proof. He needed to know if, when faced with an unguarded opportunity, her survival instinct would override her honesty. He rationalized the test. It was necessary to protect what was left of his life and his heart. Sarah was finishing the evening cleaning, her routine methodical and unhurried. She cleared the stoneware plates from their modest dinner, simple chili and cornbread, and moved to wipe down the counters. Her movements were slow, punctuated by the occasional rest where she would lean against the counter, her hand rubbing the small of her back. The physical toll of her condition was obvious. Her exhaustion was not feigned. Michael, watching from his shadowy vantage point, felt a fleeting pang of guilt but quickly suppressed it. It was just an observation, not a reason to drop his guard. His job as a firefighter was based on assessing risk. This was a risk assessment of the human spirit. As she moved across the room, she passed the table. Sarah stopped abruptly. Her shadow froze. Michael held his breath, the calculated rhythm of his feigned sleep almost impossible to maintain. He could feel his own heart hammering against his ribs, not with fear of being robbed, but with a strange, intense anxiety about the outcome. He was testing not just her, but his own remaining capacity for trust. He waited for the slight sound of the brass clasp being opened, for the rustle of cash, for any indication that his cynical assumption was about to be confirmed. Sarah turned fully toward the box. The light from the lamp illuminated her profile, the smooth line of her forehead, the curve of her belly, the determined set of her jaw. She reached out a hesitant finger, not toward the clasp, but toward the side of the box, as if testing the temperature of the metal. She pulled her hand back immediately, as if the object had given her an electric shock. She took a deep, shuddering breath, that Michael could faintly hear even through the storm outside. For a full minute, she simply stared at it, her expression unreadable, a battle waged silently behind her deep-set brown eyes. The choice was stark: remain honorable and face continued hardship, or take the unguarded path to temporary freedom. Finally, she bent down, a difficult maneuver in her state, and lifted the box with both hands. It was heavy. Michael's muscles tensed, waiting for her to move toward her small room, to hide the box under her thin mattress and wait for the morning. But she didn't. Instead, she carried the lockbox, supporting the weight against her abdomen, and walked directly toward his bedroom door. She paused, took another steadying breath, and gave a light, almost deferential tap on the wood. "Captain Brown," her voice was a quiet murmur, husky with fatigue. "Sir, I noticed this was left on the table. It looks important. I just wanted to make sure it was put away safely." Michael kept his breathing steady, forcing his jaw to remain slack, as if in deep sleep. He needed to see her final action. He heard her footsteps retreat a short distance, then return. Through his barely open lids, he watched as she placed the box on the corner of his heavy wooden bureau, the single most visible piece of furniture in the room. She placed it precisely, centered on the surface. Her hands lingered for a moment on the smooth wood, and then she turned to leave. Just as she stepped away from the lamplight, Michael saw her briefly press her hand to her mouth. She was crying. Not a dramatic, loud weeping, but a quiet, controlled stream of tears tracing paths down her cheeks. The tears were for her own desperation, for the sheer audacity of the temptation she had just resisted. That solitary, silent display of emotional exhaustion was a profound shock to Michael. It wasn't the action of a thief. It was the sacrifice of a righteous soul. Sarah returned to the kitchen and simply continued her cleaning routine. Her body language subtly changed. The strength she had summoned to resist the gold seemed to have exhausted her completely. She moved slower, leaning more heavily, yet she still finished scrubbing the last pot, meticulously drying it and hanging it on the rack. The sight of her, a woman alone and vulnerable, weeping over a moral victory that would ensure her continued poverty, shattered the cynical framework Michael had so carefully constructed around his heart. The test, he realized with sickening clarity, had been a grotesque failure, proving nothing about her character except its excellence and exposing the ugliness of his own doubt. He lay there, motionless, the storm and the fear in his own chest finally beginning to abate, replaced by a deep, cold surge of shame. He had been looking for a reason to confirm his worst beliefs about people, and she had given him undeniable evidence to the contrary. He owed her an apology that would be as painful to give as her honest actions were to observe. Block 2. Conflict development, emotional deepening, and turning points. The remainder of the night stretched out like a desolate plain for Michael, marked only by the gentle rhythm of Sarah's soft humming as she finished her final chores, now and then pausing to whisper to her unborn child in the other room, words of hope about blue skies and quiet streams. Michael remained in his self-imposed prison of pretense, the weight of the unopened lockbox mocking his lack of faith. He could no longer attribute her behavior to clever performance. Her silent tears had been the truth. He was witnessing pure, unvarnished integrity, a quality he had convinced himself had been burned out of the world by greed and betrayal. The $6,000 on his bureau now felt less like a test and more like a symbol of his spiritual bankruptcy. He had watched her habits over the past months, the way she insisted on darning her own socks with threadbare yarn rather than accepting his offer of new clothes, the way she divided the grocery purchases, making sure the more expensive cuts of meat were left for him, subsisting largely on beans and rice herself, the focused, almost spiritual devotion with which she cared for his sick old border collie, Jasper, even though he was not part of her job description. These were not the calculated actions of a thief positioning herself for a major score. They were the consistent habits of a woman who placed her own moral code above her immediate, dire needs. As the first weak light of the grey dawn began to filter through the heavy cloud cover, Michael finally allowed himself to wake. He stretched dramatically, letting out a loud, convincing groan, a performance that felt cheap and theatrical after Sarah's quiet, genuine suffering. He made a show of patting his pockets, then looking around for the lockbox with a manufactured urgency. When his eyes landed on the box exactly where she had placed it, on the corner of the bureau, his pretense nearly crumbled. He approached it, opened the clasp, confirmed the payroll was intact, which he knew it would be, and then walked out into the main cabin area. Sarah was already at the stove, stirring oatmeal. The exhaustion in her face was more pronounced in the morning light. Deep bruised circles underscored her eyes, and her skin was pale, almost translucent. She looked up, her expression a mix of quiet anxiety and resignation, ready for the interrogation she assumed was coming. "Good morning, Captain Brown," she said softly, her voice strained. "I trust you slept well." "I did not, Sarah," Michael stated, his voice flat, his gaze holding hers. He picked up the lockbox and carried it to the heavy timber table, placing it down before sitting. He didn't invite her to sit. He knew he couldn't hide behind formality now. "I need to talk to you about this." Sarah flinched, instinctively placing a protective hand over her belly. "The box, sir? I moved it. I apologize if I presumed, but it was sitting on the table, and I was worried that—" "I put it there, Sarah," Michael interrupted, his voice dropping to a low, rough tone of self-disgust. "I put it there unlocked, deliberately. I wanted to see what you would do." The color drained instantly from Sarah's face, leaving her a ghostly white. Her hand dropped from her stomach as if struck. She swayed slightly, gripping the edge of the stove for support. "You were testing me," she whispered, the raw pain in her voice cutting him like a shard of glass. "You thought I would steal from you." "I am deeply ashamed to say that I did," Michael confessed, meeting her gaze steadily. "My past experiences, my previous failures in judgment, they created a deep-seated distrust in me. I allowed a coward's caution to overshadow months of watching you act with nothing but honesty and diligence. I treated you like a suspect, Sarah, and I owe you the sincerest apology I can give. You did not deserve that. No one does." Tears sprang into Sarah's eyes again, but this time they were different. Not tears of private despair, but of wounded dignity. "I understand caution, Captain," she said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. "I know what I look like, a pregnant woman alone, without prospects, without history. The world expects me to be desperate, and I am desperate. But desperation is a condition, not a character flaw. I have lost everything, but I will not lose my integrity. It's the only thing that man left me with." She was referring to her betrayal. Michael had learned only minimal details from the agency. Sarah had been a young college graduate, working in a city far away, who had been promised a future by a charming, older partner who vanished the moment she told him about the pregnancy, taking her small savings and destroying her credit. She had been forced to move farther and farther away, unable to find work due to her condition, until she was sleeping in a shelter for the last time before his remote job offer. "I believe you," Michael said, pushing the lockbox away and leaning forward. "More than that, I admire you. Most people, faced with that temptation, in your situation, would have justified the action. You chose the harder path, the one that kept you poor, simply because it was right. That kind of moral strength, that's a kind of heroism I've spent my life looking for in a firestorm, but I found it in my own kitchen." Sarah finally released the stove and walked slowly to the table, sinking into a chair opposite him. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Thank you, sir. Hearing you say that means a great deal, but I understand if you can no longer trust me to be in your home. I can pack my things today. I'll take only what I've earned." "You misunderstand, Sarah," Michael said, gently covering her trembling hands with one of his own, a gesture he hadn't offered a woman since his betrayal. The unexpected warmth of her skin, the surprising fragility of her wrist, sent a current through his arm. "I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking you to stay, but not as my housekeeper. Not anymore." His words hung in the silence, heavy with unspoken implication. Sarah's wide, questioning brown eyes searched his, looking for pity, for guilt, for any of the usual transactional emotions he'd been accustomed to trading in. She saw none of it. She saw a man who had been wounded, who had tested his own boundaries of distrust, and who had been genuinely humbled by her goodness. "I need you to tell me what you mean, Captain Brown," she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't need charity. I need work." "It's not charity. It's a trade," Michael explained, his voice suddenly steady and firm, like a man who has finally seen the path through the smoke. "You trade your isolation for partnership. You trade your fear for security. I've spent 3 years in this self-imposed quarantine, convinced that everyone who came near me wanted something I had. You came, you worked, and when you had a clear path to something I had, you not only refused it, but protected it. You showed me that honesty isn't a luxury, it's a non-negotiable choice. You've brought something back to this cabin that the fire and my own cynicism extinguished, a sense of hope and purpose. He removed his hand, giving her space, but his expression remained open and honest. I have a big house, Sarah, and soon you'll have a baby. I'm offering you and that child a place to call home, permanently. A life where you don't have to choose between honor and a meal. A partnership based on the absolute knowledge of who you are. I want you to stay and help me turn this place back into a home, a real one. Sarah stared at him, tears streaming freely down her face again. But these were different. They were hot, immediate, tears of shock and overwhelming relief. The burden of months of struggle, of lonely fear, of constantly having to prove herself in a world that already judged her, lifted in that instant. "Captain Brown, she began, unable to find the words. Michael reached out and squeezed her arm gently. "Please, just call me Michael. And before you answer, you should know this offer isn't made lightly or out of pity. It's made because I know with absolute certainty that you are the most honorable person I have ever met, and I don't want to live without that light in my life." He watched her, the simple, unspoken emotions of a new beginning hovering in the air between them, feeling a profound shift in his own soul. He had tested a woman's integrity, but in doing so, he had, unintentionally, rediscovered his own. Dormitory Block 3, Climax, Emotional Resolution, and Lesson Learned. Sarah's tears finally subsided, leaving her face wet but radiant with a fragile, dawning hope. She had spent the last 8 months constantly preparing for the next disappointment, the next setback, the next door slamming in her face. Michael's confession and subsequent offer were the antithesis of everything she had learned to expect from men of power and wealth. She gripped the edge of the table, steadying herself to speak the truth she had guarded even from herself. "Michael," she whispered, testing the familiarity of his first name. "I need to know you're offering this out of genuine feeling, not just guilt over the test. I can't let my child grow up on a foundation of charity and apology." "I'm offering this because I fell in love with your silence," Michael admitted, the words coming out clear and forceful, like the blast of a fire engine horn cutting through the noise. "Not your silence out of fear, but your silent dignity. I fell in love with the woman who speaks to her unborn child about the beauty of the mountain sunrises, even when her own sky is dark with worry. I fell in love with the person who, when given a choice between a fortune and her moral compass, chose the compass without hesitation. I want you here, not because you need rescuing, but because you made me see that I was the one who needed saving." His confession broke through the last of Sarah's resistance. Her fears, her pride, her learned cynicism, all dissolved under the weight of his absolute sincerity. She had also felt the slow, steady pull toward this quiet, wounded man. She had watched him train for grueling mountain rescue operations, seen the dedication in his eyes, witnessed the gentle way he treated Jasper and the respect he always showed her work, even if he doubted her character. "I love you too, Michael," she confessed, the phrase feeling more real and concrete than any promise she had ever spoken. "I have fought it every day, telling myself it was impossible. You are a mountain captain. I'm a refugee. But I love your strength, your quiet dedication, and the kindness you try to hide behind your gruff exterior. I love the way you looked at that lockbox, not as money, but as a test of what was left of your faith. I want to help you rebuild that faith." The chasm between them, the gap of wealth, class, and past trauma, suddenly felt irrelevant. They stood, two wounded souls who had retreated from the world, finding a lifeline in the simple, profound honesty of a single night's moral trial. Michael rose from the chair and walked around the table, taking her hands in his. He lifted them and pressed a tender kiss to her knuckles. "Then you'll stay?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll stay," Sarah confirmed, her own voice steadying into a calm, powerful resolve. "I'll stay and help you make this place a home, not just a fortress. And that baby, Michael, that baby will have your name and your love. I promise you that." Michael gently pulled her into an embrace, careful of her condition, resting his cheek against the top of her head. The kiss they shared was a quiet promise, a communion of two people who had endured betrayal and found a new covenant in the most unlikely of places. It wasn't the kiss of passion, but the solemn seal of a shared future, one built on the concrete, undeniable proof of character. As they drew apart, Michael held her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away the last of her tears. "We have so much to plan, The baby is coming soon. The doctor in town, Dr. Henderson, is excellent, and his wife Lila is an experienced nurse. We'll ride down as soon as the flood risk is clear. We'll convert the solar room into a proper nursery. We'll need a crib, a chest of drawers, 100 little things I know nothing about. Sarah laughed, a clear, bright sound that felt entirely new to the cabin. It's all going to happen so fast, Michael. Are you ready for the chaos a baby brings? And me? I face chaos every day, Sarah, he replied with a slight smile. I run towards fire. But this is a different kind of challenge, the kind I want. You're adding to my life, not taking away. You're bringing life back to this mountain. They spent the rest of the day planning, their voices low and filled with excitement. They talked about names. She loved Lincoln for a boy. He favored Eleanor for a girl, and about renovating the small, unused wing of the house into their family space. They discussed how to manage the logging crew payroll, this time together, creating a new shared budget that gave her a genuine partnership stake in his estate. As the sun began to set, painting the western slopes in fiery strokes of orange and crimson, they sat together on the vast porch swing, Sarah's head resting against his shoulder, his large, calloused hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. The storm had broken, and a clean, fresh wind blew through the pines. The lockbox, now secured in the safe, was no longer a symbol of doubt, but a tangible reminder of the strength of the foundation they had built. Sarah's integrity had not only saved her from further hardship, but had also saved Michael from the emotional prison of his cynicism. They had both learned that overcoming past injustice requires a courageous choice in the present. The lesson was clear. Trust is not given blindly, but earned through consistency, and once earned, it is the most valuable asset a heart can possess. The desperate maid had proven her worth, and the isolated captain had finally found someone worth protecting, worth loving, and worth trusting completely. The rich mountain firefighter, having finally passed the hardest test of his life, a test of faith, was ready to begin his true new life. If you loved this story of overcoming betrayal and finding a new beginning on the mountain, then welcome to our community. Please subscribe now and join our family as we continue to share stories about integrity, love, and life's unexpected twists. We look forward to having you. We love hearing from you. Tell us in the comments, if you were Sarah, how would you have reacted when Michael confessed to testing you? Would you have accepted his apology immediately? And for everyone watching, please share. Which city are you watching our stories from? We hope you liked this video and that you take away the powerful lesson that genuine character will always shine through, even in the darkest circumstances. What did you learn from Michael and Sarah's journey?